Hi, welcome to week 4 of Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
On August 20th, 1984, episode 16 aired, and we watched it August 20th, 2019. Now, it starts with Cece getting his call from Augusta, disguising her voice, and he immediately calls the security company and says, block the wall, don't let anyone get out of there, send in everyone. And 2 guards show up. We see 2 guards throughout, so they swarm the whole thing. But apparently the wall is covered, so...
I would imagine there's more guards if they're swarming. It's hard to swarm with 2 guards.
We only ever see 2 inside.
Yeah.
They never show us the wall during that episode.
No.
So probably because no one's trying to climb over it. So, Joe gets a bunch of stuff out of Channing's room. He lifts up the blotter and finds like a hidden ticket and some weird laminated looking papers.
Yeah, he grabs a whole bunch of papers. He also grabs a little keepsake as well, which
Yes,
may come back to haunt him.
Grabs a photo of Kelly, so if anyone in the family notices it missing, they'll immediately realize it was Joe, I would think.
Yeah.
So he sneaks out, but the alarm's been raised. He realizes he can't leave, and he sneaks into an empty room, which I thought at first was Kelly's, but we find out that it's actually Joe's room. Cruz's room, because Cruz walks in on him.
Yeah.
And immediately doesn't raise the alarm, so that's good. So Joe says he's looking for evidence in Channing's room, and Cruz agrees to hide him.
Yeah.
So that's good. At the party, Peter asks Mason if it's a good political move to date Santana, which Mason doesn't care for.
They're still needling each other. And again, as I mentioned last time, they had their little confrontation in Peter's office. I'm still wondering why Peter thinks it's a good idea to get under Mason's skin like this. Like, it just doesn't seem that smart. And Mason actually tells him that. So I'm just not sure where Peter's confidence is coming from.
Mason insults him by saying, if I want to know anything in the area of high school physics, you'll be the first person I consult.
Yeah.
And then Peter starts to blame Mason for Joe being out, if you'd done your job better. So, yeah, they're really not getting along, and I can only see Peter losing out on that.
Yeah, I mean, Peter must be very confident in his relationship with Kelly. And from what we've seen so far, Kelly and Mason seem to get along generally. So, I'm just kind of, I would have thought if I were Peter, especially now that we know he has a little bit of a murky history, that laying low and, being at least cooperative with Mason it seemed to me, be a little bit of a better strategy than actually trying to get into confrontations with him.
Kelly seems to not really... I mean, she seems to be okay with the fact that Cruz and Tony believe Joe. She's not really shunning them like Cece would. She's sort of letting everyone have their opinion. So I think she's probably not telling Mason what Peter says, and probably not telling Peter what Mason says.
Yeah,
so.
That's right.
Over down in Los Angeles, Ted and Danny want to go with Jade on her audition. They're a bit worried about the dress she's chosen. But she says, there's nothing wrong with a late night casting call, because, these producers work hard during the day making movies. So she goes alone. There's a couple of other girls in the lobby, or in the waiting room, waiting for Baron Winterset. And he kind of insults both of them for being old. And then later in his office, we hear him insulting someone on the phone for being 29 rather than 20.
Yeah, it's for me anyway, not a really great first impression. Although I think for Jade, being kind of young and a bit of an ingenue, this is probably encouraging. It could be encouraging because she's looking at it probably as this giving her shot. she has something that her competitors don't have, which is that she's young and fresh.
Well, he drops a lot of names while he's on the phone,
Mm-hmm.
and they're like, movies and stars that Jade knows. But for all we know, he may have been lying about being the producer of that movie that she knew about. He may have not even had anyone else on the other end of the phone.
And I also wondered too, if the names he was dropping, if she did actually know them quite as well as she was letting on. I thought maybe, 'cause she's so desperate for this chance. She thinks this is a wonderful opportunity. She wants to impress him. And I was almost wondering if maybe this is almost a little test he's doing to see just how naive she is and how much he can really get out of her. Because I wasn't. It could be in the world of Santa Barbara that these are real movie stars in real movies, but I thought it was just as likely that these were names that he was just making up, or maybe were people who were less prominent, and maybe he was just kind of testing Jade a little bit.
He does actually say, "Oh, sorry for the late casting call. I have been working all day," but probably everyone he's ever had in the office who's had a late casting call had their friends say, "Are you sure you should go there at night?" So he probably has this ready to sort of make everything sound legit. And then he says she's got a good look and she should come back tomorrow for a screen test. So that really puts Jade over the moon there.
And of course she makes a mistake that I think will definitely come back to haunt her, which is she signs a contract on the spot with him. We don't really know what the contract says, but he does mention that this will give him exclusive rights to what? To her image, to anything else she wants to appear in. It sounds like whatever it is going to ultimately give him a lot of control over what she decides to do. And it made it seem to me like if at some future point, if she decides she doesn't want to have any part of whatever it is he's producing, he will probably produce this contract and say, well, then you have no career at all. That's my prediction.
That could happen. Meanwhile, back in Santa Barbara, Augusta hears the commotion going on at the Capwell house and says, "Think of me when you go back to prison." So she's pretty sure they've caught Joe in the act.
And it did seem to me in that moment that it was a bit more than money for her. So she's asked Peter for the $100,000. We still don't know quite what for. But remember, since the very beginning, since the very first episode, she's been trying to keep Joe out of Santa Barbara. So I think there's definitely more to it than that.
She's been more proactive than Cece in a way.
Oh, she has,
Trying to get him out or keep him out.
So we don't really know why.
So Peter shows up later and he reveals he doesn't have the money yet. He couldn't get it from Cece. We never saw him ask Cece for it, so who knows if he even did.
Yeah.
But Augusta's, obviously says, well, I want the money because I'm delivering as we speak.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and it made me wonder if Augusta has a little bit of a backup plan for if Peter reneges on the money. Because when you think about it, if she gets rid of Joe, he's got what he wants, right? So it made me wonder if he doesn't pay, will she actually go through with her threat of exposing him, or will she try to squeeze him a little bit more, maybe up the ante a little bit? I think that will be really interesting to see.
She asks him once again what's more important to him, Kelly or the money, and he says they're equally important, which she takes to mean the money.
Yeah, I think she reads him pretty well.
And she says, make sure Kelly is happy. If Cece thinks she's not, you're finished.
And I actually think that's a really, really smart point to make. And in his own way, I think Mason's tried to make that point to Peter as well. That, Peter has been acting pretty cocky, actually. And as we said earlier, he better be pretty confident in Kelly's feelings for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he thinks this is it for him, and I don't think he's all that worried that anything's going to happen to him.
I think Augusta and Mason are reading Peter pretty well at this point.
Mm-hmm. Maybe he has some tricks up his sleeve.
Yeah, that'll
we don't
be
know
fun
about
to see.
Because he doesn't seem to have ammunition against anyone.
No.
I almost wonder if it's possible that Mason purposely messed up the parole hearing so that Joe would get out, because it's certainly stirring things up for people that he doesn't like.
Yeah,
so
that's
I'm wondering if that, combined with that pile of papers Kelly found, maybe there's a possibility that he wanted Joe back for some reason.
Well, and he certainly has kept, if we think of a previous episode where he kept all of the news clippings and all of the information about the case, which of course upset Kelly quite a bit, but there might have been another reason for that too.
We will see.
Yeah, at the very least, it is convenient for Mason to have a lot of the people he dislikes being thrown into disarray.
Now, at the party, Santana tells Kelly that she'd like to design the wedding, not as a client, but as a friend.
I actually really liked that scene between Santana and Kelly, because we really haven't seen them properly together.
And
we
they
saw
did
them
grow
a
up
little
together.
bit. Yeah,
so.
Exactly. We saw them a little bit when Cruz was taken to the Capwell house from the hospital, and they were both kind of by his side a little bit. But this is the first time we've actually seen them together, and the first time we actually realize that, as you say, they've been friends for a long time. And they have not only a long relationship, but a deep relationship. They really like each other.
Mm-hmm. I think she complimented Kelly on her dress, or vice versa. And,
yeah.
She said she could design something for
Yeah.
Kelly. So, yeah. So then, as Cece takes Mason away, so she gets Rosa to drive her home. Kelly mentions that they haven't set a date yet for the wedding. So.
Yeah. So again, that makes me really question Peter's tactic. You'd think he'd have this locked up before he starts mouthing off to Mason and possibly screwing over Augusta.
Santana also mentions it was a big mistake that they let Joe out of prison. So even though they haven't really had any altercation with each other yet, I think they're reminding us how very much Santana doesn't want him out of prison. So, So Rosa drives Santana home, and then she quizzes Rosa about what Cece likes, what kind of food he likes, etc. So she's planning something.
I think your point last time was really good, where you said maybe she's lining herself up for Cece.
If she marries Cece, she'll be Brandon's legal grandfather, right? So we're grandmother. So she'll have rights when Cece sees him to go with him. So, and then Mason shows up, and she tells him to leave immediately, and he goes, "All right, just one nightcap," and pours himself some brandy and her one too. So she tries to speed up that drinking of the brandy, and he wants to know if they'll see each other again, and she's very non-positive about that happening. So.
I don't think Mason has very good game, really, when it comes to Santana. He's almost belligerent with her. It's definitely the opposite of romantic.
It seems to be just, he's dating all these other women, so it seems to be just that he wants to one-up Channing on something. So.
Yeah. Actually, my favorite part of that scene was when Mason finally leaves and Santana's closing the door behind him, and she rolls her eyes a little bit, like this is obviously being, a much longer evening than she had anticipated.
Now, Cece, Mason, and Kelly all check out Channing's room at various points. Mason starts looking in the drawers to see if anything's missing, but Cece tells him not to, so I think Cece just wants it left the way it is. No one's noticed the missing photo of Kelly yet.
I did wonder if there was another reason why Cece didn't want anyone looking around the room too much, but you're right, it could just be for sentimental reasons as well.
Now, Cruz tells Kelly that he thinks Joe is innocent. Meanwhile, Joe's in the closet listening to that. And
Yeah.
Kelly doesn't think he is, I don't think. So.
No, she's very adamant that she's not, which I find really interesting because we've started to see over the last couple of weeks more and more characters like Sally, like Tony, and of course like Cruz himself, who have raised a lot of doubts about it. So to me it's really interesting that Kelly is very, very adamant about it.
Mm-hmm. And she basically says, you know what, I have a new life now with Peter. So she's telling Cruz that whatever with Joe is completely over.
Mm-hmm.
So Cruz comes up with a plan to sneak Joe out of the house. He said you could sleep in the tub overnight, and then in the morning you can hide in the trunk of my car, and I'll call a mechanic or a friend of mine to pick it up and take it to a mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
And that'll be believable, and he'll drive out with you in the trunk. So in the morning, Joe sneaks out, and quite early, before dawn, but as he's going down the hallway, he hears Cece's voice on the phone, and so he quickly runs back and runs straight into Kelly.
Yeah.
And that's how it ends.
Yeah, that's the cliffhanger.
So we will be back after we watch episode 17 of Santa Barbara.
See you later.
Hi, welcome to Misha Dianne Watch Santa Barbara, episode 17.
Hello.
We watched Santa Barbara on August 21st, and it started with Jade working out. Two girls just want to have fun.
And I wonder if they owned some kind of rights to that, or if they had to pay for that song. If that was something they were trying to promote, like they did with the Peebo Bryson one.
I don't know. I think they probably just had to license it.
Hmm.
I mean, remember that the last episode ended with Joe getting up before sunrise. So Jade is up before sunrise doing these exercises. So,
Yes.
Ted and Danny are awakened to the sound of this music, thinking at first it's an earthquake.
I think we actually hear Ted say that it's only 6 o'clock in the morning.
Mm. At one point, Lakin calls Ted to tell her about Joe working for her mother. And Ted says some not so nice things about Joe, and Jade overhears them, and she gets angry with Ted.
Yeah, she's still very, very protective of Joe.
She's insistent that he's innocent.
Mm-hmm.
That later, Peaches does Jade's makeup for her screen test, and tells a little about her past, how a vice cop used to arrest her a lot.
Yep.
And that she's got back at him by stealing his watch.
And she also provides, I think, a little bit of foreshadowing, or at least echoes some of the concerns that Ted and Danny have had for Jade, and especially this new relationship she's formed with Baron, what's his name?
Mm-hmm. She tells Jade that Danny and Ted are just concerned, but she says no, they're jealous. So
Yeah.
she thinks there's nothing wrong with this. She gets a call and is told by the other guy that she originally met that the screen test has been moved to a hotel.
Mm-hmm.
Then she tells Danny that her screen test is at a movie studio, so she obviously doesn't think he would take kindly to finding out the screen test has been moved to a hotel.
Yes, and I wondered about this a little bit, whether she was telling Danny this just to throw him off the scent so he wouldn't nag her or express doubts or try to accompany her, or if she herself is starting to have a few doubts about this very unusual sort of process, and she's just trying to put them out of her mind. I didn't really know.
I think, Danny doesn't really have much to do, so I think he probably will try to follow Jade, so it might be for the best.
Yeah, I think so.
Now Augusta enters Peter's apartment with her key, which at first I thought she may have had for months, but it turned out she got it last night when she drove Peter home, and he was too drunk. But she mentions that he did try to prove his manhood, and she's not letting on that she knew anything about what was happening at the Capwell mansion, but she said, "Oh, it was hard to sleep with all that racket. Why don't you phone Kelly and find out exactly what that was all about?"
Yeah.
So, and of course it's still 6 a.m., so it's a bit early to phone. Now Kelly and Joe are in the hallway, and he asks her, tells her why he's there and asks her to help, and she says, "No, forget it." And he says, "Well, then I'm going to turn myself in because I don't want to put you through, the stress of having turned me in."
Yeah.
And then she suddenly pulls him into her bedroom and says she'll hide him.
Yeah.
So Peter phones, and she says, "No, I was up all night, but I can't talk. I'm doing something right now." Hangs up on him. So Augusta assumes that Kelly's weird response is because Joe's been arrested and she's flustered. So she thinks all went well. Joe tells Callie Cruz's plan to sneak him out of the house in the trunk of his car. So next thing you know, Kelly is in Cruz's room with Tony, and they try to get Tony. They ask Tony to drive the car off the property, and then Kelly follows her in her car, so Tony has a ride back. So
and that's how
what they do. That's how they get Joe out. He stops at home, I guess, to go through the bag of things he took from Channing's room. The first thing he looks at is the photo of Kelly. And there's a bunch of things in there that he looks at. The diary and a letter that Channing wrote to the people of Hungary. Stuff like that. And he also finds a love letter that doesn't seem to be addressed to a specific name, but, Channing says, a whole bunch of things like, "I can't wait to see you again," and "smell your perfume," and such.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and then we cut immediately to Santana, so the assumption is it is a love letter to Santana, but it's interesting that's a secret. I guess only Cece knows about the baby, right? So I guess in a way, this is a secret that hasn't come out yet.
Yes.
So that's, I don't know how Joe could use it to his advantage, or Dominic, but that's something to think about. So the next thing you know, Joe shows up at Augusta's, and she is flustered because she does not expect him to
Not expecting that, no.
So he calls Dominic from there to say he's got the stuff and arrange a meeting. Actually, he leaves a message, and Dominic calls back later to arrange the meeting. He also meets Lakin there, and she says she's not scared of him, and they talk about Jade a little bit.
Yeah.
Kelly comes back from dropping off Joe and says that Joe's safe, tells Cruz. And then Cruz says, "Why would Joe be doing all this if he wasn't innocent?"
Yeah, he really puts it to Kelly, because, and when you think about it, what Cruz is saying makes total sense. I mean, Joe's really flirting with jail again by doing all this stuff. So if he was guilty, he's gotten away with just serving 5 years. You'd think he would just go off on his merry way and not endanger that.
Yeah. So Kelly's conclusion is that Joe should just leave town because her loyalties are divided.
Yeah.
So that's interesting that now we have plus the fact that she hit him. We now realize that Kelly's starting to think about Joe.
Yeah.
Now Santana cleverly packs up a birthday present for Brandon. She packs up some riding pants and a riding helmet, just like Channing used to have. So she goes over to Cece and says, "Oh, I want you to give these to Brandon." And he's suspicious, so he checks it out and he sees them and he says, "Oh, Channing would have loved this." And he checks the card, and she hasn't written anything.
Yeah.
That's not innocuous in there. So
She's already softening him up, though, because if you remember, it was just a few episodes ago. We didn't even want to talk to her about this. The subject was closed. And now they're talking about it a little bit. She's gotten him to engage with her, and he's talking about delivering a present on her behalf, but it's an anonymous present. So she's already made a little bit of progress, I think, in wearing down his defenses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She finds an opportunity to go into Channing's room while Rosa's cleaning it.
Mm-hmm.
And then she has some flashbacks to some kind of mock wedding that they did, and telling Channing that she was pregnant. So that was, I guess, confirmed that Channing knew that she was pregnant.
I thought that was nice, actually, to get a little more, just a little more insight into her relationship with Channing, because we caught a very brief glimpse of that in the pilot from 5 years before. But we haven't really gotten a lot of insight into it since then. We've certainly heard how she's grieved and how she's carried the memory of Channing with her. But actually, hearing those memories play out, they do a kind of audio while she's looking at his the things in his room. That really gave a lot of depth, I thought, to the relationship.
Yeah, I hope we see some more of that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if Channing appears in flashbacks that are unrelated to the murder, but maybe.
Yeah.
He's in, a handful of episodes throughout the coming months. So I guess there's a chance we'll see some of that.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, she makes a cake for Brandon's birthday and blows out the candles herself. And I think we know what she's wished for.
Mm-hmm.
And Mason decides Cruz is well enough now for him to attack him for what he said last week about Mason, dropping the ball on investigating all this stuff. So, and his attack is not to defend his actions, but to say, "Oh, Cruz, there were all these rumors when you left town originally," and he says, "Well, I just left town to work with Red Adair," and he said, "Yeah, no, but there were some rumors. I'm gonna do some more digging, and then you'll be sorry."
So one of the things we really see, I think, with this scene is that Mason is not one to let things go. He's been carrying this, I guess you'd almost say a vendetta against his dead brother for years, to the point of still trying to capture his brother's girlfriend, Santana. And, when we saw the initial confrontation between Mason and Cruz a few episodes ago, it seemed over and done with. But what we're seeing in this scene is that the Mason has not let it go at all. He's just been kind of putting it aside and working on it a little bit and thinking about how he can get his revenge.
Mm-hmm. And he does a lot of threatening of Cruz that, the offer might be rescinded,
Yeah,
but he doesn't go so far as to say that he has the authority to do that.
No.
Because really, Cece, maybe Cruz should have said, "Oh, well, I'll tell Cece that you fired me," or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't think that would have went over well with Cece. So,
in a way, he's almost a little bit falling into the same trap that he has very rightly accused Peter of falling into, where he's overstepping a little bit. He's making some assumptions about how Cece is going to react to certain situations. From what we've seen so far, apart from Cece's disappointment in Cruz backing Joe's story, beyond that, I think Cece is generally a lot more respectful and admiring of Cruz than he is of Mason. So we don't necessarily know how he's going to respond if he's given that kind of what's almost an ultimatum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mason Mason and Cece and Peter get together, and Cece basically blames Mason for installing a substandard security system. Peter takes the opportunity to say, "Oh yeah, you should have found a better one." So
Yeah.
that Mason's not too happy about Peter jumping in on that.
And we've also seen just in these two confrontations, or a few scenes we've had between Cruz and Mason, and the little bit we've seen of Cruz and Peter, that Cruz is not even remotely intimidated by either of them.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not really even that intimidated by CC, which I think CC actually really appreciates. So it'll be interesting to see how these various rivalries play out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Cruz doesn't really need the job, but he has.
No.
They did mention that he has decided to settle down. And,
Yeah.
he asked Santana to look for a house for him with a nice view of the ocean.
Yeah.
And then he says, "Well, she should probably buy me some furniture." And then she asks if she should decorate it. And he said, "Oh yeah, but don't make it look like I had a decorator." And they do a lot of flirting over the discussing his new bed.
Yeah. A lot of heavy flirting, which of course is going to be, I think, ultimately another pain point between Cruz and Mason. Because already Cruz is making a lot more headway with Santana than Mason has in the entire time we've seen them together.
But I think if she's really going to pursue CC, I don't think she can make it look like she's responding in any way to Cruz, at least in front of any of the other family members.
I think you're right. But she actually does have a bit of an excuse to hang out with Cruz without arousing any jealousies or rivalries, because she and Cruz were childhood friends.
Mm-hmm. And now that she's working with them, she has a lot of excuses to go to his room.
Yeah.
So now the police want Cece to sign up on a list of missing articles, which is odd because aside from some papers and the photo of Kelly,
yeah.
I wouldn't think any of those papers would have been logged anywhere. So, as far as they could tell, there was a slightly open drawer, and they didn't notice the missing photos. So I don't know where this big sheet of missing articles came from.
I think that missing photo is a really interesting piece because, as you say, no one's really noticed it missing yet. But we do see it again in this episode, and it's quite interesting because it's not just a photo of Kelly. It's actually got to Channing from Kelly written across it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's quite unmistakably an object that came from Channing's room.
Mm-hmm. And Kelly will definitely remember having given it to, but then she already knows Joe did it, so I don't know.
Yeah.
But maybe the other family members will.
But there's no way that Joe can pass it off as being one that he had.
That's true if it's found in his possession.
That's right.
And Cece does remember a French woman calling him, so he mentions that to the police officer. And Peter's suspicious when he hears that.
Yeah.
So Peter goes to visit Augusta, and he thinks she knows something about the break-in. Mm-hmm. She's wondering why she's not afraid of Joe Perkins, and why she's not afraid to have Joe Perkins alone in the house with Lakin. So, I mean, obviously the answer is she knows Joe's not the killer.
Exactly. Right? That was a very good point, which leads us to wonder, of course, what her role in all this is. Did she kill Channing, perhaps? We've talked before about whether or not she could be Dominic. It doesn't the timelines don't seem to quite add up because in this episode, for example, when Joe is talking to Dominic, we do see a scene of her with Peter. So that, unless they're actually taking place at different times, it's not really indicated.
And with Augusta, we really have no idea what the motive could be.
No.
Whereas with, Mason or Peter, we could theorize, that it's related to some family thing. But with Augusta, she's just a neighbor, as far as we know.
Yeah, as far as we know.
How could she possibly have ties with Channing? What if the love letter from Channing was for Augusta?
That's an interesting idea. Yeah.
Since we know Augusta's been having affairs going back, to when Peter was Warren's teacher. So
yeah, that's a possibility too.
And one line, one thing he mentions is he says there's been no intimacy with Kelly for weeks. So I assume that's since Joe Perkins showed up. So
yes, and so that really lends credence to what Augusta has already pointed out, is that Peter is very much in this for the Capwell name and the power. He's barely got an intimate relationship at all with Kelly at this point. Mm-hmm. I really like the banter, by the way, between Augusta and Peter. That's really fun.
And then Joe meets up with Dominic in the usual place and hands over the bag by, putting it on the ground because Dominic still doesn't want Joe to see his face. And Joe turns his back, and Dominic's like scrambling through the stuff in the bag and says, "I'm going to take this home and look at it." And Joe turns and says, "No, I want you to take it." And then Dominic pulls a gun on Joe.
Yeah.
So this is one of several times.
We've already seen that at least twice, haven't we?
Yeah. Once in the car and once at the in that place, I think. Or that was Joe pulled a gun on.
Yeah, Joe's pulled a gun once. I think Dominic's
so they're still not really trusting each other.
No.
So
the very fact that he brought a gun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, Dominic obviously is really worried about his real identity being revealed. And is it someone that Joe would recognize, or just a general wanting to be anonymous?
Mm-hmm. And also the other way I saw that scene was that Dominic was possibly very concerned that Joe wouldn't hand over all of the materials to him.
Mm.
I thought maybe he brought the gun to kind of threaten him in case he resisted.
Yeah, I think Joe may still be worried that Dominic wants to hide evidence, that could be, pointing to Dominic being the killer or something like that. So
I wondered actually if he had included the picture of Kelly in that batch of stuff.
Be interesting. I don't know if there's anything hidden behind it.
Yeah, that's another interesting possibility.
And that was the end of that episode. So we'll be back after we watch episode 18 of Santa Barbara.
And see you later.
What just happened? We just watched episode 18 of Santa Barbara from August 22nd, 1984. But first, Peter threatens to tell everyone, the whole town, that Augusta's having an affair with Joe. Now, we didn't quite catch the beginning of that scene because it was all in French, thanks to the source of the episode. There were a few bits in French, more than we've had to date.
They don't actually sell Santa Barbara, so
we found them.
We get it
in a
where
field.
We can.
Found them in a field somewhere in a bag.
Yeah.
It appears that these episodes, at least the first several dozen that I've checked, are sourced from a French source, and the audio has been overlaid with English, largely, but some bits are missing. And what I suspect is happening is that someone has taken an English audio source, perhaps they audio taped them like I did back in the day, and they've managed to get their hands on these French videos, and they've overlaid the English audio wherever they could. But once in a while, as you do when you're taping, maybe you're trying to save tapes. You don't record the commercials. You stop it. That's why most of the little bits of French tend to be right at the beginning of a scene after a commercial break. People delay, turning it back on, or something distracts them, or they forget. Happened to me many times.
Do they actually? They don't actually broadcast this at all on. Are there soap opera channels or anything where it could possibly still be broadcast?
I don't think it's being broadcast anymore. I think wherever it was broadcast, it started a year or two after the American premiere and ran for probably 8 years or so, somewhere in Europe, and probably finished by the mid-90s. I don't think it's been rerun since, and I don't think the soap opera networks that they had in the States ever ran them. They were owned by ABC, or ABC's parent company, so I think they actually focused on the ABC soaps, so probably that's another reason Santa Barbara hasn't re-aired anywhere in North America.
It's good to know.
The other possibility is that some of the audio is sourced from videotape, and that the image quality of the French ones was just that much better because they would have been a few years behind, and probably people had better VCRs back then, or the tapes haven't had as long to deteriorate. They might even have been borrowed from the masters. Like some of the image quality seems so good that I'm wondering if someone had access to the French masters, and that these have filtered through to people who've added overlaid the English soundtracks afterwards. So we've also got a few episodes. As I was accessing these online, I found some of them had bits in Italian, some had bits in German, some have bits in Spanish, some are in English with Spanish subtitles, and then there are a whole lot in some kind of Eastern European language that I don't know, but I'm guessing I have some in Russian and some in Chechnyan and some in Czechoslovakian. So if it comes to the point where we encounter an episode that's not in English at all, we may have to decide if we'll put the podcast on hold till we can source an English episode, or if Google Translate can somehow translate the whole episode for us while it's playing. So.
Yeah, you would think there must be some translation software out there that might help us.
But right now I've got the better part of 750 episodes in English, with only about 6 or 7 in one of the other European languages that we could semi-follow if we were watching an Italian or a French version. It wouldn't be that bad. If we were watching a German version,
I was going to say German would be perfect for you, but I guess that hasn't come up at all.
There have been the odd ones, and I did download some that were completely in German. This is before the English ones were available at all, and I thought that I might be doing a rewatch on my own in German.
Oh.
But the other issue is then they may not have run in the same 1-hour time slot overseas, so they may have been edited down to half an hour. So the episode counts would be all mixed up. And even then, some of the foreign language ones, they may not have started with episode 1. They may have started in the middle of the second year, so their episode counts would be screwed up from that too. So what I'm hoping is that the episodes that I have that are numbered 750, for example, really is number 750 and isn't shifted by some number because it was actually the Russian numbering or something. So, we'll see as we go along. It'll be very obvious to us if we hit an episode that's suddenly out of sequence. Worst case scenario, that wonderful French site that I discovered has a link to very thorough episode summaries.
Yes, that might be good.
Worst case scenario, we would be reading an episode summary of an episode and commenting on that if we can't find anything. The other thing is I do still have some of my own audio tapes which I have to find. I might actually have the dialogue that we missed from this episode on one of those tapes. So
I think we managed to put most of it together. It was actually quite a short. It was just like 2 or 3 minutes. Yeah,
I mean, Peter and Augusta were arguing about something, and we heard the word Joe, and then in the next scene, Peter is threatening Augusta.
Yeah.
So, and he says basically, everyone in town has seen you with Joe, so it wouldn't be hard for them to believe that you are having an affair with him.
I wasn't really sure how much of a threat that actually was.
Well, I think he's trying to counter her threat to reveal about his affairs. when, she's still trying to get the money out of him. So I suspect that was his counter threat for that.
But I'm just saying, on the face of it, why would anyone care that she was having an affair with Joe?
Well, I guess, yeah, maybe Lionel would care.
Well, he's not. He's off in Borneo or something, apparently doing his own thing. So
maybe we should learn French and
yeah,
find out what that conversation was about.
Lincoln would care, I guess, but Warren already seems to have Augustus' number. And Kelly is apparently smitten with Peter, as far as we know at this point in the episode. And, so I'm not sure why anyone would necessarily care. Maybe CC would care about Joe hanging around his neighbor's house, but
I don't know.
It just seemed like kind of a lame threat to me.
Now back at the place, as I call it in my notes, Dominic was sorting through the bag of goodies Joe had brought him, and Joe turned around and Dominic had pulled a gun on him.
Mm-hmm.
And Joe was adamant about Dominic not taking the stuff away. He says, "How do I know you're not the killer?" And this evidence is, you're just going to take this evidence away and I'll never see it again.
And we'd hypothesized about that in our last chat, that maybe Dominic brought the gun to ensure that Joe gave him the stuff.
Mm-hmm. So Dominic doesn't answer. He just takes off, and we see a car chase, and we see Dominic run into his apartment building, and Joe follows, and he wakes up all the neighbors, and they basically tell him to get lost, and they have no idea who Dominic is. No one's ever heard of Dominic. So he talks to at least 2 people, and 2 other people are witnessing it, and no one volunteers that they know Dominic. So
now, I was a little bit puzzled as to why Joe lost Dominic in this scene, because he's chasing the car. It seems to be a red car. It seems to me he would be close enough to be able to read the license plate. So that would be a lead. And the car is parked, I assume, in an apartment building, so he would maybe even have a chance to search the car. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, if he now knows where Dominic lives, he could stake out that whole...
Yeah.
He could hire that same detective that Santana hired to stake out the apartment.
He could get a sense of the building and where the exits are, and it seems to me it's not a lost cause at all. It seems to me it's actually a really good lead.
Mm-hmm. So we see Dominic looking through the stuff in the bag, checking out, once again, that ticket to some unknown event pops up, and it's obviously important because it's been handled every time we've seen it, and Dominic does read some pages from the diary.
And Dominic's in a room that it's got kind of a nice wooden table and a lamp and a horse sculpture, so I don't know if we'll see that bit of scenery again in any of the scenes, but that might give us a little bit of a clue to who Dominic is as well.
Mm-hmm. It seemed like a bit of a rundown apartment building.
Yeah, I was actually wondering if Dominic was reading this stuff in the apartment building, or if Dominic had maybe managed to escape out a back door or something and was doing this little search back at their actual house.
Or maybe Dominic has an apartment in that building specifically just for changing into the Dominic
That's
disguise.
what I'm thinking, yeah.
And,
I don't necessarily...
and the phone calls, right?
Yeah, exactly. I didn't necessarily think that this was where Dominic lived.
Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Jade is dreaming of fame, and she dreams about being in a movie with the 2 biggest stars in the world, Richard Gere and Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
So, interestingly, Tom Cruise would still potentially fill that same role if Santa Barbara was being filmed today.
Yeah, I guess this would have been maybe around the time of Risky Business.
84, I guess. We'll research that. We haven't done
a
check on movies since the beginning of the series. Maybe once a month we'll do a check on what movies have been released in that month. So maybe in September.
Yeah.
We'll do that.
But she's all decked out. It's a very movie star scene. She's got her long satin dress and her fur boa, and she's settling into a chair with her name on it.
Danny knocks on the door, wakes her up, and he gives her a good luck kiss. And then later we see Danny making breakfast. And we hear Jade probably working out again to the Madonna song Lucky Star.
Yep.
And she decides, or Danny decides she should use Ted's car. And somehow she manages to run it up a pole while it's in the driveway, so in the parking lot of their building. So then Ted comes home and Danny's making sandwiches. So he spends the whole day making meals.
Yeah, Danny did a lot of eating in this.
Yeah, so Ted was at work at the pirate place, but Danny wasn't today. So not sure why, as he didn't have a shift. But tells Ted about Jade wrecking his car.
Mm-hmm.
And then they start talking about girls, and Ted says, well, I met a lot of girls, but I was wearing a pirate costume. So even though he's thinking about Lake and Danny, he's still trying to fix him up with other girls.
But Ted sounds very serious about Lincoln in this scene. He mentions something that makes Danny think that Ted would even consider marrying Lincoln, or at least having a longer future with her.
Yep. And nothing else progresses down there. Now Cece tells Kelly that he's going to give them a honeymoon for two anywhere in the world.
It turns out that Cece and Sophia, is that her name?
Yeah.
Who is the mother of all of the Capwell children except Mason, had their honeymoon in Belgium, which I thought was kind of an interesting choice. Yeah.
Yeah. And we get confirmation that she is the mother of all the other children, although I guess with Channing being Channing's the oldest.
I don't know what
Channing's the oldest between him and Ted. We know
Ted, I thought, was the
because
youngest.
of Mason talking about your second son. Yeah. Maybe Eden could be older than Channing, but not son, so she wouldn't have been named Channing. So it's hard to know because 5 years have passed since any scene we've seen with Channing,
yes,
right?
That's right.
And you've only seen Eden on the cover of a German novel I have of Santa Barbara.
And I wasn't sure which one she was.
Yeah, but they both look older than the guy playing Channing now. And then Cece says that Eden's almost the spitting image of Sophia.
And it sounds like they're all blonde because he makes a point about all of the children he had with Sophia having her coloring. Which is another distinguishing feature with Mason, who's got dark eyes and dark hair. So
and then actually Ted and Danny had a talk at one point about Ted had said to Danny, oh yeah, he had a bad relationship with Pamela, Mason's mother, but then when he met my mother, they had a great love affair.
Yeah.
So, until she passed away. So Kelly tells Cece that she'll probably have a grandchild soon. That he'll probably have a grandchild soon. I assume she's talking about herself and Peter.
Now that was interesting because we know from Peter's conversation with Augusta in our last episode that he and Kelly haven't been intimate for quite a while. So obviously Kelly is thinking that part of their relationship will flourish again.
I think she's thinking just marrying Peter will wrap up all the issues.
Yeah, I think so.
And then she says that Cece is the best parent anybody could ever have, which I don't know if Mason would agree with that. And certainly we've seen Cece being very evil to several other people. So,
but he does have a definite soft spot for Kelly.
Now, Peter comes in to thank Kelly for the naughty phone message she left him, and
in French, so we're not quite sure what she said, but it did sound very naughty in French.
And then he tells Kelly that he thinks Augusta and Joe are having an affair, or that there's rumors of it, and Kelly's pretty upset by that because she says, Peter, this is exactly the kind of thing I've been trying not to think of. So
that kind of backfires on Peter a bit. He's trying to put his little threat to Augusta that he made at the beginning of the episode. He's trying to implement that a little bit, but
so that it'll be believable.
It doesn't impress Kelly at all. She just thinks he's gossiping, and she doesn't want to hear it.
And Peter actually tries to use as evidence the fact that he and Augusta used to fool around with Kelly.
That was an interesting
Kelly
tactic.
appears to be aware of that. So, but I guess it would help then to diminish Augusta's threat to tell about the mole he has on a certain part when he talks to Kelly. So he's maybe laying the groundwork for, he had a thing with Augusta years ago.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. And then after that falters, he slams right into Mason, who tells Peter that he's been seen coming out of Augusta's place at least twice this week. So Mason's got someone following Peter.
Yeah, we know that Mason is keeping a very close eye on him, and this really rings true with what we now know about Mason from our last episode, where Mason was talking to Cruz about, how he might know things about Cruz's past in Texas. And so we know now that Mason kind of puts his little tentacles out to get information about people he might view as rivals or have some concerns about.
Yeah, and that ties in with all those documents that Kelly found about the murder. I think Mason's just building up information that he can use when needed against people. So it's interesting that Cruz had left town 5 years ago, so it seems like he either left just before the murder or maybe just after. He said he'd remembered reading about the trial.
Yeah.
So he could still have been in Santa Barbara, I guess, but then why wouldn't he have gone to help his friend? So
that's right.
I suspect he had left by the time the trial happened. And then he hadn't seen Santana in 5 years. And then Santana was celebrating the 5th birthday of Brandon with the 5 candles. So she must have been about 8 months pregnant when the shooting happened in June of 1979, when we saw her in that brief scene. Because a lot of things seem to happen all around that time so far.
Yeah, that 5-year period seems to be very significant.
Now Santana has found Cruz a houseboat, which is even closer than a beach view. So he said that sounds good, and he wants to go see it. He feels a bit faint, so she has to help him home with his shoes, and just making comments about the size of his feet when Mason walks in. So Mason's already in a bad mood there, and he's probably doubly in a bad mood because the reason he's come is to give Cruz the news that it's Cruz Castillo Day in Santa Barbara on August 22nd, and that he's going to get the key to the city, and there'll be flag waving and photographers, etc.
And of course, when he comes in, Cruz and Santana are in, well, let's say a very informal sort of position. Santana's at Cruz's feet trying to help him put on his shoes, and Cruz is lying around in a little pair of shorts. So that's not good optics, probably from Mason's point of view.
No. And Cruz thanks Mason for bringing the document. He says, "Always glad to be the bearer of good tidings," which is very ironic. And then Santana gets... she actually asks Cece if Brandon got the gift, and Cece does not want to talk about it.
No, he shuts her down.
So then she takes Cruz to the houseboat, and he likes it, and he writes a check immediately for 30% less than the asking price, which I can't imagine anyone doing here in Vancouver.
No.
And they steal some champagne from the current owners, and then does he faint again? No, they look through a photo album of his, so he must have brought some stuff with him. I think they're looking at all the girls he's dated. And anyway, somehow she ends up having to help him to the bed.
Well, he's, this is his first day really out of bed. This is the first day he's actually moved around at all, and he's gone all the way to a houseboat. So I think he's just feeling a little bit tuckered out at this point, and is getting a little faint. So he sort of collapses onto the bed, and Santana helps to tend to him.
Mm-hmm. It's possibly where we'll find them at the beginning of the next episode.
Mm-hmm.
And so Joe's doing some yard work outside, potting some plants, and Augusta stalks him, and then she makes some naughty comments, which you couldn't really make to your employee nowadays without being brought up on charges. But she says she might have to get out Minx's riding crop to help him work faster, and then
it's kind of a saucy thing.
She says, that Capwells are just over that fence there. Kelly must be so close. Is that on your mind at all? And then she starts touching Joe, and it looks like Joe's kind of might just give in to Augusta this time. And who should ride by on the other side of the fence but Kelly Capwell on her horse? So she spots Joe and Augusta and gets off her horse immediately and ties it up and tries to get a good angle view. And Joe basically refutes Augusta's advances, and she leaves. And so Kelly sees Joe all alone, and she climbs through the barbed wire fence to get to him. And she gets snagged on it, and she gets quite badly cut on her arm, and she calls for help, and Joe comes running to help, and, gets her loose, and says that her arm needs some tending, and suddenly they're kissing.
Yeah, he wraps her arm
the
off
song
in a bandana.
Oh, that's right, he gets a sweaty, disgusting bandana that he's been wiping his face with all episode, and puts a tourniquet around her. But, they start kissing for quite a long time while their song plays, and that is how the episode ends.
We should actually, before we forget, just give a little shout out to Jade and her screen test, which we finally get to see the beginning of.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Jade shows up at the hotel, and there's a couple of scuzzy-looking girls there already. And she arrives. I have no notes about that. It says Jade arrives is all I have.
Well, she arrives. She's got a new bright red outfit because she's ruined the original outfit she was going to wear because she was trying to put on her makeup and everything, and I guess she was really nervous, and she spilled nail polish all over herself. So she's got a brand new outfit, and she is at this hotel room in the middle of the night. She's lied to Ted and Danny about where the audition is. And when she arrives, a little knock on the door, and the guy who's running the screen test, who's the original guy she met at the casting call a couple episodes ago, says something. I didn't quite catch what he says, but it sounds like he says something like, "Oh, there's the jailbait." So,
something like that.
Obviously, this is not going to be a conventional screen test at all. So, it doesn't have great vibes, I'll be honest.
No, I'm hoping Danny did manage to follow her somehow.
Yeah. So that's something we're going to find out how that goes.
I'm not quite sure how she got there without Ted's car. If she took the bus or
sprang for a taxi, maybe.
Yeah. So I assume we'll find out in this next episode. So join us again after we've watched episode 19 of Santa Barbara.
See you later.
If ever you're in my arms again, this time I won't kill your brother. What just happened? We watched episode 19 of Santa Barbara on August 23rd. And it started with Joe and Kelly kissing, just like we ended last time. But then Kelly backs off and changes her mind.
Yeah, suddenly what was a very passionate kiss turns into Kelly basically yelling at Joe to leave her alone and running away.
Now, it's interesting because usually when a soap opera reprises the previous scene, sometimes they redo it and they rejig it slightly. So it's not clear if the kiss we see at the start of this episode is meant to be the same kiss we saw at the end. Mm-hmm. But the last one was about 30 seconds long and very passionate, and this one was quite short. So I don't know. Obviously, the cast wouldn't have seen the script for the next episode, maybe not even the director.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if they thought, this is it, Joe and Kelly are back together when they filmed the previous kiss.
Yes,
and then when
maybe.
they get the new script, they're like, oh, we got to back off on this somehow.
We also didn't see the horse again. So
No, that's true.
I don't know if it ran off or, it just was off camera or whatever. So, but Kelly did get home.
Spotlight on that horse now. Yeah, so Kelly goes home, and Augusta arrives actually to interrupt their discussion, and Kelly leaves. And after some half-hearted work, Joe quits his job. He doesn't actually quit, but she gives him the check for the last week, and he walks out.
And he's in a very bad, he's really upset over how things went with Kelly from sort of one extreme of passion to the other. Mm-hmm. And so he, kicks over a table and kind of throws a little bit of a tantrum before he leaves.
Yeah, he calls John and asks him to meet him at a bar, and John thinks he wants to rehash that whole I'm innocent thing, but he says, you know what, I'm leaving town.
Yeah.
Just want you and Mom to get back together.
Yeah.
So now Jade is at her screen test, so I guess this is probably the middle of the day, mm-hmm. because everything in Santa Barbara is happening during the day. She does some improvised dancing for a screen test with a ghetto blaster that she brought along, and
mm-hmm.
The director keeps telling her to make it sexier, pushes her to unbutton a button, and eventually finally gets to it. Well, you should probably be naked for this, to see how uninhibited you are. And she spends about half the episode trying to say no, and he keeps talking her into it, so she finally leaves.
Yeah. But he does give her till midnight or something to change her mind.
That's true.
Yeah.
So that could still happen. When she gets home, she kind of whitewashes the story for Ted and Danny and Peaches and says everything went great.
Yeah.
And then Peaches tells a tale of a French count she met in Cannes once, and how things worked out well for her, and Jade's like, oh, this guy's English, so she's kind of drawing parallels to there. But Danny and Ted are trying to get Peaches to, listen to the whole tale and to be on their side against Jade, but really all of Peaches' stories seem to just reinforce Jade's theory that there'll be some fairy tale, producer who'll see her and make her a star.
And Peaches, I think, inadvertently bolsters Jade's perspective, because when the way Jade describes this screen test to the group, it sounds like a personality test, which apparently is a thing where directors will sometimes just test the way a person appears on camera, how they project their personality. Mm-hmm. So she kind of inadvertently gives Jade cover to present the screen test that way.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
I did actually wonder if all this fan dancing that Jade was practicing could play a role in this. If she might go back there with some fans and
that's a thought.
Take off her clothes, but really be doing Peach's fan dancing routine.
Well, that would be a funny thing.
Yeah.
And then
that would be fun.
Danny can burst in.
Yeah.
So Ted and Lake can talk.
Yeah.
A lot of I miss you stuff, and then he invites her back down. So maybe we'll see her back down in LA.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you'll remember that Mason had last said that he had seen, or his spies had seen, Augusta coming and going from Peter's apartment several times this week. So Peter is angry that Mason's been spying on him.
Mm-hmm.
But Mason says it's just because of Kelly.
Yeah.
And Peter says, well, Kelly's my responsibility now, which was the wrong thing to say to Mason.
It was.
Because he talks about Capwells and their lineage and how they're traced back to the royal line of England, and that even if he succeeds, she's the Capwell, not him.
Yeah, he never hesitates to reinforce to Peter what his place actually is. And once again, my impression coming out of this is that Peter is definitely making a lot of assumptions and is maybe a little overconfident in his position, which Mason, of course, reinforces as well. because really, as we've said, Peter's entire position really depends on Kelly remaining in love with him,
Mm-hmm.
or at least convincing herself she's in love with him.
So then Peter says nothing's going on with Augusta, so I guess he's already thinking, okay, I got to spin this,
Yeah.
you know. And then Mason says he's chased away a lot of fortune hunters who've come calling on Kelly.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. So some of that may have happened before she met Joe, but some of that may have happened after Channing was killed, but before Peter started to court her. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. But he's also, this is another way of him putting down Peter. He's really saying, you're not anything special. I have seen so many of you before. You're just a carbon copy of every other guy who's gone after Kelly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, back at the houseboat, Cruz sees Santana sketching, and it's stuff for the Capwell Hotel, and he made a joke that he thought it was a bit too elaborate for his houseboat.
And I think I made the comment to you as we were watching it that this seemed to be the longest open house I'd ever encountered. Because remember, Cruz actually hasn't bought the houseboat yet. They're actually there as part of an open house.
Mm-hmm. So. He did give Santana the check.
Yeah.
Maybe there was a scene where she left, got everything signed, and came back in between.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know.
But, I mean, they've settled in. They've taken stuff out of the fridge.
He's looking through
been lying around on the bed.
A photo album, right?
Yeah.
So he's brought that. I don't know if they have that in his trunk of his car or brought it from his parents' house or something. But
logistically, I hope he buys the boathouse after all this, because he's already mucked up the bed and taken stuff out of the fridge.
And they built that expensive set, so
yeah.
It looks like hardwood floors and. Maybe that's a cheap thing to fake for the movie people. They've already got a yacht. So then suddenly Santana wants Cruz to teach her how to ride a horse. So he thinks it's to impress the Capwells, but she says, no, I just don't want to look foolish. So she's got some event coming up in mind, I guess, where she thinks she'll be horseback riding with the Capwells. And maybe this is related to the riding gear she gave Brandon.
Mm-hmm.
So I think she has some plan that we haven't quite seen all the components of.
Well, we know that polo is a big thing in the Capwell household. Mm-hmm. We've already seen Peter riding a horse, so obviously he had someone teach him to ride before he attempted to start seducing Kelly.
Well, maybe there's some sort of annual event coming up that Cece always attends that involves horseback riding. She wants to be ready to join in if she can manage to wangle an invitation. But then maybe the riding clothes for Brandon were just her playing the long game that Cece might think, oh, it might be fun for Brandon to come up to this thing we do every year. Mm-hmm. And so maybe she's like just putting all these pieces so that they might fall into place for her.
Well, we know that Channing was a polo champion. And, well, I don't necessarily see Santana playing polo because I imagine, at least in this society, it's still a male sport. I think even if she can ride, like we saw Kelly riding a horse, so, maybe even riding with Kelly and cementing that relationship or being knowledgeable about horse riding. Maybe there's some sort of Ascot-style event that we'll be seeing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe Santa Barbara, the real Santa Barbara, has some sort of annual event that they're tying into this. So Kelly comes into the mansion with the cuts on her arm from the barbed wire fence, and Mason sees that, and although she doesn't say Joe was involved, he immediately assumes Joe attacked her, and she doesn't really say anything to,
She just says, look, I've had a long day, just go away, basically.
Yeah, so she's aware that he started calling people already at the police station or the district attorney's office to try and hunt down Joe Perkins.
Yeah.
So, and then he says to Cruz that your friend is in trouble. So Cruz says, well, I'm going to try and find Joe. And Santana says, I don't think the Capwells will like that. So I think Santana's worried that, it would mess up her
Mm-hmm.
plans with
Mm-hmm.
Cece if she hangs around with Cruz, and he's like continuing to antagonize the Capwells. But then also she doesn't like Joe because she thinks he killed Channing. So
No, and I mean her focus right now is on um, getting a connection with Brandon. So she's no longer outright seeking revenge on Joe, but at the same time, she's still not going to be Team Joe because she views him as responsible for Channing's death.
a police officer arrives at Augusta's to ask her where Joe is, and even though she wants Joe arrested, I guess she doesn't take well to the questioning.
No, I don't
In
think
the
so.
end, she says that he left between 1 and 3 hours ago.
Yeah,
Which gives plenty of time for Cruz to find Joe.
yeah.
So Cruz eventually arrives at the bar that Joe's at. John has left, I think, and
Mm-hmm.
he says he'd been looking for him all over town. And Joe said, "Oh, I wanted to be in a place where no one could find me." So that explains why Cruz didn't find him in one of his usual dives. So Joe tells him about Dominic, and he thinks Dominic is the real killer and stole all the evidence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, which could still turn out to be the case because we haven't seen Dominic in this episode.
I think that was. I mean, I don't know if Joe was really strategizing this, but in terms of the show, I think that was really good information for Cruz to have because one thing we've seen in this show is that Cruz is very competent. And
Mm-hmm.
so if he's a big believer in Joe's innocence and we've seen that he will stand his ground, we know that Cruz is willing to fight the system and we also know just from the encounters, the conversations he's had with Mason, that he will pursue a logical argument. He would have been a really good lawyer and I think a good investigator in another line of work. So I think Cruz will probably take up this clue.
I mean, I'm thinking if Joe really does leave town, maybe Cruz and Dominic will end up working together on
Yeah,
the case. Because you
yeah,
really don't need Joe because he's not a witness. He's the wrongfully accused. So
yeah.
even without him, the whole rest of the whodunit can continue.
It's limited with what Joe can do, really.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas
Especially with
Cruz,
the risk
it's not.
of his parole breaking.
Yeah.
So Mason enters the bar with another officer, telling Joe to come with them, but Cruz says, "Oh, what are the charges?"
Yeah.
And Mason, "Oh, I don't need charges." He says, "Well, you seem to be harassing Joe all over town." And Mason says, "Well, who cares?" He says, "Well, I think the media will care because they know you hate Joe. You're the assistant district attorney, possibly running for DA coming up, and here you are hounding this guy, and we have like a whole set of incidents already logged against you where you wrongfully harassed him, and I guess Mason must still be thinking of running for DA because he backs off."
That's what I was interested in too, because Mason has sworn up and down to his dad a couple episodes ago that he was going to be his own man and he wasn't interested in politics. He wasn't going to go the route that would, I think Cece was hoping he would eventually be made governor or something. And Mason was very adamant he just wasn't going to do that. But he does obviously care a little bit
I mean, I guess
about his reputation.
in the city, like maybe he doesn't want to be governor or president, but in the city of Santa Barbara,
Mm-hmm.
as a district attorney, he would have a lot of power over a lot of different people
Yeah.
that he may be targeting for his various things. So maybe he's thinking assistant district attorney is pretty good, but district attorney would give him the ultimate power. So maybe, even though he has no interest in politics, that jump in his career to DA may still be something he's interested in doing.
Yeah.
Because he didn't really say he wanted to stop being a lawyer or anything.
No.
So Kelly phones Peter and says to meet her at his place, and she lets herself in with the key over the door and uncorks some champagne. And when he comes home, it's all lovey-dovey, and she says she wants to be with him. So this is obviously a reference to the fact they haven't been together for weeks. So it shows them kissing and lying down, and that's how things are left with them. So we think they may have a good evening together, but who knows?
And actually, this to me reminded me a lot of, I think it was in week 1, where Kelly was confronted by Joe, confronted by her feelings for Joe, and her reaction was to go straight to Peter and push her relationship with Peter forward as a way of counteracting that. And I think they started to run off to Vegas together.
Mm-hmm.
And this episode, it seemed to me to be the same, because she hasn't bothered with any intimacy with Peter, like, for weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And now that she's had this passionate kiss with Joe, which she repudiated right away, but, it's obviously, the whole incident with Joe is obviously still in effect. She's running around flustered and upset the entire episode. And her way of solving it is to go to Peter and to try and counteract that by pushing things forward with Peter.
So maybe the first thing we see in the next episode will be her setting a wedding date. Because that's been referenced several times this week as something that hasn't been done yet. And with her pattern of moving things forward with Peter, that could be the next thing. And then that would give us a date to look forward to in the timeline.
But if I were Peter, I would also be a little bit concerned by this whole little scene with Kelly. Because one of the things she says to him in this scene is, she said, "Oh, I have no doubts now. I have no doubts. I've gotten past all that. We've turned a corner." And I kind of wondered if Peter really ever realized that she had doubts. I mean, he certainly hasn't been talking that way. And, maybe had convinced himself that, maybe against, his better judgment, that, she was just not intimate with him because she was upset over Joe coming back, not necessarily that she had doubts about her relationship with Peter.
And maybe he's not responding to that because he knows, he was there when Mason sent the guys out to look for Joe. He knows Joe's going to be arrested.
Yeah.
And that if he attacked Kelly, that's going to be the end of it for Joe.
Yeah.
So I think that's the most important thing for him, is if Joe's gone, whatever Kelly's wrestling with, that'll wrap itself up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think if they do set a date, it would be quite soon, too. I mean, it would, because the whole point is to get Joe out of her mind. So.
Yeah.
And then the only other thing that happened is that Joe suddenly arrives at Augusta's place.
He's obviously drunk.
He's been drinking. He had a pitcher of beer that he gave a little bit to John and some to Cruz. Maybe they had another pitcher. But, So he's already been paid, so I don't know what he plans to wrap up with Augusta.
Yeah, I mean, for me, watching this episode, it seemed like this whole scene with Kelly, where they were very passionate, and he got the romantic interlude I think he'd been dreaming about for 5 years, and he got that. And then when she pulled away and started screaming at him and ran away, it seemed to me like that was, if it wasn't Kelly turning a corner as she's claimed to David, it did seem to me like it was Joe turning a bit of a corner this episode, because he did seem very genuinely devastated by it, and it did seem to change his perspective a certain amount. So
maybe his intention is just to have sex with Augusta before he leaves town.
That's what I was thinking.
Their professional relationship's been wrapped up with the check, and she's,
and he's leaving town.
Made it appear, at least, that she's interested in him. I mean, I would think even though she's been playing him the whole time, based on what we hear, she may still be interested. So.
Yeah.
So we will see when we watch episode 20 of Santa Barbara.
We'll see.
This week's spotlight on is going to be on Renée Jones, who plays Dr. Tony something.
I don't remember her last name.
I don't think they've said her last name yet.
Yeah.
This week's spotlight is on Renée Jones. Renée Jones was born in Florida on October 15, 1958. She worked as a secretary and model before becoming an actress. In the late 1970s, she began appearing in television shows such as 10 Speed and Brown Shoe, The Jeffersons, The White Shadow, The Brady Brides, and WKRP in Cincinnati. In 1984, she appeared in 8 episodes of Santa Barbara as Dr. Tony Carlin, Kelly Capwell's best friend. After Santa Barbara, she appeared in shows such as Knots Landing, LA Law, and Murder, She Wrote, before taking over the role of Lexi Carver on Days of Our Lives in 1993. She was nominated 5 times for the NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Actress in a Daytime Drama Series. Jones portrayed Lexi Carver for 1,260 episodes, before retiring from acting in 2012.
Hello and welcome to Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara, episode 20.
Hello.
This episode aired August 24th, 1984. We've watched it on the 35th anniversary of its original airing.
Mm-hmm.
Episode 20 starts with Kelly waking up in Peter's bed, and she gets up while he's still sleeping, and she smiles. She's happy at the way things are going. Peter eventually wakes up, and he asks her to move in with them.
She's just on her way out the door, we should say. She's actually gotten dressed, and she's ready to slip out and start her day at work.
She says she has to work, yeah. So, anyway, she says they can talk about that another time. So, They didn't talk at all about setting a wedding date like we thought they might.
I thought this scene was really interesting because it was the first time I really realized the extent to which Peter has moved up in the world. Peter's apartment is actually a bachelor suite, and his bed is actually a pull-out sofa. So it looks like his entire apartment is basically just 1 or 2 bedrooms, which is a far cry from the Capwell mansion and all of the holdings of the Capwell family.
It might even be a studio.
Yeah.
So Kelly leaves and Peter is ecstatic, so he seems to think that's it for Joe Perkins.
Yep, he's air pumping and jumping around and making little kicks in the air, so he's really happy.
So Augusta and Joe are asleep in Augusta's bed after a night of passion. So the phone rings, and both Augusta and Lakin pick it up at the same time, so Lakin just listens in. And it's Dominic asking for Joe. And so then Lakin hears Joe's voice come on the other extension. So she's very angry about that. Dominic asks for them to meet, and Joe, I guess, says, "Oh, I thought I was never going to hear from you again.
You were the bad guy." Yeah.
So anyway, he's not in a big hurry to leave because he and Augusta talk about last night and how great it was, and then they kiss again. So I guess it's a while before he actually leaves.
So this scene to me was kind of interesting in 2 ways. First of all, it completely confirms for Lincoln that her mom is seeing Joe. So that's a really big turning point for her, I think. And it also confirms what we already discussed, which is that it's unlikely that Augusta is Dominic, since obviously she can't be in bed with Joe and on the phone being Dominic at the same time. I've been doing a lot of thinking about who Dominic might be, and as I've already said, I've got a couple theories that it might be a Capwell who we haven't been introduced to, or it might be some crazy soap opera plot involving Kelly having multiple personalities or something. It also did occur to me that Rosa might be a candidate as well, since she knows the Capwells very well and would have access to some of their secrets. So that's a third theory I'm working on now.
So Joe leaves, and Augusta's wondering if he's actually going to come back, because he'd been planning to leave town, but he says he'll be back.
Yeah.
And then as Joe leaves, Minx enters and advances on Augusta. So Minx is very angry with Augusta. She says, "How dare you have assignations in my home?" and they discuss, how Lionel's doing the same thing. Augusta says, he's not just in Bali studying art, I can promise you that, Minx. So Minx says, well, if there's any reason for him to be out and about with other women, that reason is right here in this house. So
no love lost between those two.
She blames Lionel's affairs on Augusta.
Yeah.
So Joe pops back home, tells his mother he's leaving town and that she should get back with John.
Mm-hmm.
Marissa says she wants Joe to stay and find the real killer. Lakin asks Augusta why she can't go back to L.A., and she says she doesn't want to be alone in the house with Minx. And then Lakin says, you won't be alone.
Mm-hmm.
So, revealing that she knows about Joe, and she's disgusted by the whole thing.
Yeah.
So she calls Jade and says she wants to come down. Maybe she can stay with Peaches.
Yeah.
As she packs her things, leaves a note for Augusta. Minx catches her writing that note and says she'll cover for her.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think Lincoln and Minx at this point are both of the same mind, that they are not impressed with Augusta's behavior vis-a-vis Joe.
Now, Peaches tells Jade she should prepare for a rejection.
Yeah.
And Jade expresses that she's a bit uncertain about William Holmby.
Mm-hmm.
Danny and Ted have an audition for their stuntman thing, and they kind of are a bit worried when they see some of the other pairs there doing much better stunts than them, and they start to argue about everything, and they end up actually pushing each other and starting a real fight in the waiting room.
Yeah, and it's very well timed, as it turns out.
Because the casting director sees them and says, you're perfect. It was very realistic. So they end up getting the job. And so Jade ends up calling back the guy, Holmby, and saying, no, I didn't call you by midnight last night, but can I still have a screen test?
Yeah.
And he says he's very busy. They need to have, the only time he's got is 6 o'clock, so come meet him for dinner at the Silver Urn.
And I thought it was really cute because they show Jade waiting in anticipation to see if she's going to get a second chance with this guy. And they also show him just sort of sitting back, doodling a little in a notepad, and then getting back on the phone and pretending that he's managed to pencil her in for an appointment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So luckily, Danny and Ted sneak to the restaurant and spy on them. So hopefully they will stop anything untoward from happening later on.
I'm actually concerned, though, that this might backfire on them a bit, because there's really not much this guy can do to Jade in a public restaurant. So I'm thinking Jade might look around and see them there and know that they're spying on her and take offense. And then in her mind, their concerns are even less credible. And so she might actually get herself into even deeper trouble.
We will see.
Yeah.
So Peter arrives at Augusta's place to find out if Joe's punched in yet. She says he hasn't arrived yet. And Peter says, well, Joe no longer has any reason to stay in Santa Barbara. Kelly is not interested in him at all, so the deal is off. No $100,000. Joe could stay in town for all he cares.
So apparently his steamy night with Kelly was so amazing. And, just it sealed the deal. And that was, Peter's not worried anymore.
Yeah. Joe arrives at Augusta's. They have a few words. Peter says he owns Kelly. That sets off Joe a little bit. They almost have a fight. Augusta manages to separate them for a while, and after Peter leaves, Joe says to Augusta, you know what? I'm sick at the thought of him marrying Kelly. I know I've given up on her, but I'm going to stay in town and make sure I stop that wedding.
Yep.
So that's what Peter's
He's got
brought
a new
on himself.
motivation. Yeah.
So he probably is not leaving town.
Yep. And honestly, I wouldn't be quite so sure that Kelly's as over Joe as she's maintaining.
Ooh. Interesting.
We'll see.
Interesting theory.
I think we'll be hearing a bit more Peebo Bryson.
Now we have a much better workout room, I think, now than we had before. CC has this segregated little area for weightlifting and things. So CC is working out when Santana arrives, and she compliments him on how well he's keeping up his body, and part of her plan to butter him up. And she says, "Oh, she's got some ideas." And he said, "You just had some ideas yesterday."
Mm-hmm.
So no, this is a different project. I got a houseboat for Cruise, and I think I can do a great job finding a house for Peter and Kelly to live in.
Mm-hmm.
So CC says, "Okay, I'll come see it." He set some time for her in the evening, and when they come back from looking at the house, he really was impressed by it, and he mentions some of the color schemes reminded him of the sorts of things Sophia used to pick.
Yeah.
And then they talk about Santana's scarf, which she reveals was given to her by Sophia when she was 6 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So she's putting all sorts of linkages to Sophia and Cece's head.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Rosa then later says to her that she's been watching her, and she says Cece's going to see right through this. She's not going to buy this thing you're trying to do here.
It's interesting to me how we currently have several parents who have very negative / toxic parenting styles in Rosa and John Perkins. But I think that's just an observation. CC actually seems like the more supportive parent of the three, even with his little arguments with Mason.
Mm-hmm. Kelly is doing sit-ups in the new workout room. She's doing sit-ups on some kind of slanted board, so they look quite impressive.
Mm-hmm.
And Peter arrives, and he's got some better ideas about how she could firm up her body.
Yeah, he sort of oozes on top of her, and they kiss a bit.
Meanwhile, Joe's got to get ready for his meeting with Dominic, so we see him get in his car, and then we see another car follow him. Joe doesn't seem to notice it because he goes to the place, goes down not the spiral staircase place, but the regular staircase.
Mm-hmm.
And then as Dominic comes into sight, a second shadow appears on the staircase behind Joe. It's the mysterious follower.
Yeah.
So Dominic gets scared. Joe sees the other person and goes to run after them.
Mm.
Next thing we see is Joe comes out the door to the parking lot and can't see the person anyway. Comes down the little steps, and the other person is in their car already, and instead of driving away, drives right at Joe.
Yeah.
And that is the cliffhanger for week 4. So we'll find out.
I assume either Joe leaps away, or it will turn out to be
The end of Joe Perkins.
The end of Joe Perkins, or it might be a slightly different encounter than we are anticipating.
I wonder who it could be following him. I guess probably not Peter, because he doesn't care anymore.
Well, I wondered if maybe it would, maybe it turns out this person's not trying to run him over. Maybe it's actually a friend. Maybe it's Cruz or someone like that who's actually twigged on to some of the same clues that Joe has.
Another person that might be interested in following Joe is Santana, but I don't. I mean, they didn't. She was at the Capwell Mansion last time we saw her, but that's a possibility.
Santana seems to me to be very wrapped up in her quest to get access to her son and to manipulate Cece. So
could be Mason.
Could be Mason. Yeah. Could
it
possibly
be
Augusta, maybe.
Yeah. So
could be, if it was someone like Augusta, she would maybe feign concern for Joe, but in reality she might be trying to find out a little bit more about this Dominique person and what it is they know.
The shadow was very non-helpful.
Yeah.
And that was it for the week. Do you have anything else you want to mention before we wrap up for week 4?
No, not that I can think of.
All right, well then we'll be back next week with episode 5 of Misha Dianne Watch Santa Barbara. Bye.
See you then.
If ever you're in my arms again, This time I won't kill your brother.